r/AskReddit. Serious, what is your most terrifying we need to leave now random rush of fear you felt? Serious replies only. In high school my buddy and I were riding our dirt bikes on the trails that ran around the logging roads in southwestern WA. Thousands and thousands of acres of undeveloped land with just gravel logging roads and trails. We were on our way back to the truck when we stopped at an intersection to figure out which way to turn. 3 dudes in overalls, no shirts and full face helmets rode out of the woods on quads. They rode a few slow circles around us then took off back into the woods. We booked the fuck out of there. Turns out all that undeveloped land is also good for growing, cooking, and dumping. Edit for typo. My car was stolen the very night I moved into my new house in a very good neighborhood. The neighbors had warned us that the neighborhood was being targeted at the time. They mentioned a woman around the corner that opened the door for knockers in the middle of the night and they attacked her and robbed her and almost killed her. We had reported the car stolen and did the police reports when it happened. Well, 2 nights later in the middle of the night I hear a knock on the door and they said open up, it's the police. Well, since I had heard the story about the other lady, I was suspicious and did not answer. I grabbed my kids and put them in my daughter's room because it had access to the roof from the window. I called the police to say that 2 men claiming to be police are pounding on my door. They said there was no police in the area and they are sending a car. Turns out, these same guys stole the car and came back for seconds. I did get my car back because they brought it with. When I was a preteen a strange man stopped and asked me for directions. That didn't make sense. As I'm trying to help him a van rolls up and the side door opens. I just booked it and never looked back. Once when I was about 11, I think, I was walking to my sister's house. This kinda nervous, kinda sketchy looking guy stopped me and asked for directions to a street 1 block over. Now, sure, people sometimes get lost when they are super close to their destination, but he was going to the main street in our district. Everyone knew where that street was. I tell him, already suspicious of what this guy wants. And then he nervously says how much? Me, being fucking 11, go what? How much? For 1 hour. 6. As I was only 1 street away from my sister, I bolted out of there, not looking behind me. He asked a kid how much she was willing to prostitute herself for. Admittedly, some kids do dress way more mature than they are. I however, did not. I wore whatever my mother was willing to buy me, and that particular day it was an oversized fleece sweater, ratty jeans and super cheap sneakers. I looked like a kid. When me and 2 of my cousins went camping with our family, probably about 8 to 9 years old, we stayed in a campground that had a playground near our spot. We would often go, just the 3 of us, to play and go back to our camper when it started to get dark, because it wasn't too far. But one day we were playing, and we weren't the only kids there but this man, Fortis, came up to us with a dog, and started talking to my cousins and they were very trusting. He kept asking them if they wanted hot dogs or cookies, and where they were from, and telling us that his camper was just over there if we wanted snacks. This guy gave me a super weird vibe immediately, so I looked at my cousins, after being quiet the whole time, and said I think I hear grandma yelling for us. Dinner is probably ready, and they argued and were confused, but after I gave them the back quote look they just shrugged and listened to me. That guy gave me the heebie-jeebies, and we never saw him again after that day. One of the times I ran away from my abusive mother, I was hiding out at an internet cafe. For context I was 12. I'd been there for a few days and the guy running the show overnight knew me and knew what was going on at home because I'd laid it on him a few months earlier when he was like, hey it's 2 AM, don't you need to go home? He didn't care about me especially, but he didn't care enough to kick me out either, so long as I wasn't causing any trouble. He'd let me sleep under one of the desks at the back etc, since it was always quiet as overnight. Anyway, this night I was just hanging out the back of the cafe bored with nothing to do, and my brain was like Geo to the bathroom, but I didn't need to pee or anything, so I was like up, and then my brain was more urgent Geo to the bathroom now. So I was like okay and did. Went into a stall and just kinda stood there for a few minutes confused, then went back out. The guy on the front desk comes over and was like, dude, someone just came in asking if I'd seen you. Said it was your mother. After a cycle of running away, getting caught, running away again, I finally got away from her and had CPS take my allegations seriously 2 years later and moved to a different city, but moved back about 5 years ago. I'm not really a believer in psychic links etc, but since I've been back I've sometimes had this feeling in myself like a deep dread, and then I look around and see my mother walking down the road across the street or driving past me or something. I was getting a coffee about 6 months back and got that feeling, so looked around just in time to see her walking into the store. At a summer camp, a buddy of mine and I climbed out onto a tin roof of a big hall that was built on the side of a steep hill. On one side you could climb out right onto the roof. On the other side it was a 3-story fall onto concrete. Being teenage idiots, we climbed from the low side over the peak of the sloped metal roof and were inching down towards the edge of the high side. We had sneakers on and had pretty solid footing, so it wasn't outrageously dangerous. Then, out of absolute nowhere, raindrops started falling. We both look at each and realize this is really bad and try to start backing up, but wherever there is even the slightest dampness, the metal is now completely slick. There is nothing to hold on to. The grip of the rubber shoes on dry metal was all we had. I look at him and see the panic in his eyes that I'm feeling too. We are trying to move up this roof as fast as we can, and the raindrops are falling harder every second. I see him break completely free and start sliding down with his eyes frozen in terror. Somehow, miraculously, he stops sliding. I made it to the top, scrambled down, grabbed a branch, and leaned back over the top, trying to give him something to grab. He eventually makes it high enough to grab the branch, and I pull him up and over. I have never felt panic like that. We were *SO* lucky to make it out of there. I used to drive for Lyft. Last year, I picked up a young couple from a bar at about 1:30 am. They were fairly chill, and I figured it would be my last ride of the night. The dude asked me to stop at a corner store on the way to their destination so that he could get cigarettes. I didn't see any harm in waiting, so I stopped and had a nice chat with the young woman while he was in the store. He ended up being about 5 minutes, since everyone was trying to get their pre-2 am beer. When he came out, he asked me to take him to a location that was in the opposite direction of their destination, but was only about a mile away. He said he wanted to meet some friends real quick and grab some beer. Since I figured it would be my last ride of the night, I said "fuck it, why not," and drive him over there. Now, I know the town we live in fairly well, but the direction that we were coming from was not a way I was used to going when I would go to this location. So when I turned onto the destination street, I missed the turn into the complex parking lot. I just came to a complete stop since the roads were empty and asked them if they just wanted me to park on the street or pull into the complex. This is when the two of them started arguing, as he suddenly wanted to go in and hang out for a few minutes while she didn't want to go in at all. She just wanted him to do his thing and get out of there so they could go home. And then something hit my car. The sound is unmistakable to me, so I immediately started to look around to figure out what it was. But there were no other cars on the road, so that couldn't have been it. Then I moved to the next thing on my mental checklist of something didn't hit me. Then what did I hit? But that didn't make any sense either, as I'd been in park and couldn't have hit anything. It's at this point that the young lady's attitude completely changed. She just kinda looked around and then said "Can we just get out of here? It hurts and I want to go home." This was odd to me, as she'd been sitting in my car for about 10 minutes at this point and hadn't said a word about any kind of pain. She followed this up with "It hurts and I can't move," put her hand to her back and pulled it out covered in blood. What the fuck? So the guy starts freaking out, thinking that something in my trunk had exploded, but it was empty. As he reached over to tend to her, I noticed something white sticking out of the seat. This hadn't been there at the beginning of the night, so I asked him what it was. He pulled on it. It was a piece of the filler fuzz from my seat. It came out of the hole that had been made in the seat because she'd been shot. As soon he grabbed that fuzz, we both had the same realization. He slammed shut his door and I drove them straight to the hospital, which was only a couple of miles away. That realization and the follow-up realization of oh, someone could still shoot you while you're sitting here was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever experienced. TLDR, a guy stalked me at work. This was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. It's a bit long, but bear with me. For context, I live only a few streets away from my workplace. This guy came to my floor one day for a team meeting. Ever since then he made a point to pass my desk when walking to the kitchen, which doesn't make sense logistically as the elevator basically opens right onto the kitchen. Keep in mind, this guy is a complete stranger. Nobody had ever seen him on our floor, so my work friends knew he purposely came to our floor just to see me. He would make excuses to be near me whenever I'm in the kitchen, to get a glass of water whilst I'm washing my dishes. He was always alone, never spoke to anyone, only watched me. This happened for about 3 months. One day he happened to be downstairs at the time I finished work. He then knew exactly what time I finish and waited downstairs for me every day. He just sat there watching, waited for us to leave, then went back up. One day I walked out with a friend. We saw him sitting downstairs, quickly walked out of the building, and parted ways assuming he would go back up now that we'd left. Boy was I wrong. My friend walked off in the opposite direction, leaving me alone. I had crossed the road and was just about to turn to the direction of my apartment when some higher power compelled me to turn around. The feeling that rushed over me just then, I had never felt it before. It was like a mix of all the most negative emotions in the world all swirling into one massive super cloud of fear. When people talk about the flight or fight response, this was literally the epitome of that. To this day I still cannot understand what made me turn around when I generally never do that. I was smart enough to go in a completely different direction so he wouldn't know where I live. He walked a short distance behind, crossed the road, and checked to see where I was walking home to. Another male colleague happened to finish work at the same time this went down, followed him and waited to see what he was doing, stalking the stalker. He confirmed that he absolutely followed to see which direction I was going, and then went back into the building once I had walked so far ahead. He would only need to follow me a short distance to see where I lived. This happened a few more times before I finally reported his ass and got him banned from entering all buildings associated with my company. Turns out he didn't even actually work for my company, external contractor, and shouldn't have even been in my building in the first place. Thank you for listening to Listen.Reddit. Please like and subscribe, it really means a lot. Have a nice day.